Imagine arriving on Earth and immediately facing a performance review. If a boy survived infancy, childhood did not mean toys, warm chats, and leisurely development. At around age 7, he entered the agoge, the Spartan education and training system. This is where the myth begins to feel uncomfortably real. At 7, boys left home and were grouped with others under supervision. Family bonds became secondary. Loyalty shifted to the state, to peers, to future military life. They were trained physically, socially, and psychologically. They learned endurance. They learned obedience. They learned to tolerate discomfort. And discomfort was abundant. They wore simple clothing. They often went barefoot. Food could be limited. They were encouraged to become resourceful, including stealing food. If caught, they were punished, not for theft, but for being sloppy enough to get caught. A useful lesson, depending on whether your goal is resilience or producing extremely tense adults. The agoge also involved music, dance, and choral performance, which surprises people who imagine Spartans only lifting rocks in silence. Greek warfare required coordination and rhythm. Marching in formation benefited from music. Communal singing reinforced identity. Even the warrior machine had a soundtrack. Literacy existed, though Sparta was not famed for intellectual culture in the Athenian sense. Their reputation favored brevity. The term laconic, meaning concise speech, comes from Laconia. Spartans supposedly admired sharp, short replies. If asked for a paragraph, they would probably send back one eyebrow. The training emphasized competition. Boys were ranked, tested, observed. Older youths might mentor younger ones in relationships that historians still discuss with nuance and debate. Greek social customs around mentorship were different from modern frameworks, and Sparta had its own version shaped by discipline and hierarchy. What matters most is that emotional softness was not encouraged. Pain was normal. Public scrutiny was normal. Being compared to others was normal. Privacy, that lovely human luxury, was scarce. As boys aged, training intensified. Wrestling, running, weapons drills, mock combat, hunting, survival exercises. The goal was not individual glory. It was cohesion. Spartan warfare depended on the phalanx, a dense formation of armored hoplites with shields overlapping. You did not fight as a lone hero doing dramatic spins. You stood shoulder to shoulder and trusted the line. Very un-Hollywood. Very practical. Cowardice endangered everyone. Discipline protected everyone. This is why Spartan culture obsessed over shame and honor. If one man fled, gaps opened. Gaps got people killed. So courage was social, not merely personal. By late adolescence, some entered harsher tests. Ancient sources describe the Cryptia, an institution possibly involving secret policing, survival training, or ritualized intimidation of helots. Details remain debated. What is not debated is that Spartan society feared helot revolt constantly. And with reason. The helots vastly outnumbered Spartan citizens. Imagine living as an elite warrior caste surrounded by people you oppressed and needed. That creates permanent anxiety. So Sparta's military focus was not only about foreign enemies. Much of it was internal control. This changes the picture quite a bit. The famous warrior city was, in many ways, a society built on fear of the workforce. Not as glamorous on a motivational poster. At around age 20, a Spartan male could join military mess groups called syssitia. These were communal dining groups central to citizenship. Men ate together, trained together, and bonded politically. Contributions of food were expected, usually drawn from land worked by helots. Again, the hidden engine of Spartan equality among citizens was inequality beneath them. A man might marry around this age, but full residence with his wife could be delayed. Men often continued barrack-style communal life until around 30. Imagine being legally married but still effectively living with your teammates because the Constitution said so. Romance, Spartan edition. And yet Spartan women had an unusually notable status compared with many Greek societies. They could own property, receive physical training, and move more freely in public life than Athenian women. This was not because Sparta discovered feminism in the Bronze Age. It was because the state wanted strong mothers producing strong citizens and women managing estates while men trained or campaigned. Pragmatism, wearing progressive clothing. Spartan women became famous in Greek literature for bold speech. When later writers quote a mother saying to return, with your shield or on it, they are presenting the ideal, courage, duty, no melodrama. Whether every mother said things like that is doubtful. Many probably said things like, please stop bleeding on the floor. Now, let's talk appearance, because myth has been generous. Spartans did maintain long hair for adult men, especially before battle. Grooming mattered symbolically. They polished shields, cared for appearance, and cultivated presence. They wore red cloaks in some periods, perhaps to mask bloodstains or simply as recognizable uniform style. So yes, there was branding. But the average Spartan warrior was not a movie bodybuilder carved from marble. He was a trained citizen soldier, weathered, practical, often lean, shaped by drill and scarcity more than protein shakes. And like all humans, some were handsome, some ordinary, some looked like they had been assembled in poor lighting. Let us now float gently toward politics. Sparta had a famously mixed constitution. It had 2 kings at once, from 2 royal dynasties. Because apparently 1 king was too simple and 3 was excessive. These kings led armies and held religious roles, but their power was limited. Sparta also had elders called the Gerousia, magistrates called ephors, and an assembly of citizens. The ephors, 5 officials elected annually, could even check kings. Greek politics loved complexity almost as much as it loved arguing. This system aimed to prevent tyranny and maintain balance. It also meant Spartan government could be cautious, conservative, and slow-moving, which matched the culture perfectly. Sparta distrusted luxury, novelty, and outside influence. Coinage was famously restricted in some traditions, with stories of cumbersome iron money discouraging wealth accumulation. Whether exaggerated or not, the anti-luxury image mattered deeply. They wanted citizens focused on virtue, not vanity. Though every society says that while quietly rewarding status, foreign travel was limited at times. Outsiders could be expelled. Spartans feared corruption by softer customs, richer habits, and suspiciously comfortable pillows. Insularity became identity. And yet this severe system produced admiration across Greece. Even rivals respected Spartan steadiness in battle. Their reputation for discipline was real, earned over generations. But reputation can hide fragility. Because the more exclusive the citizen body became, the fewer full Spartans existed. Citizenship required land, contributions to messes, and lineage. Over time, numbers declined. Wealth concentrated. Some citizens lost status. Birth rates mattered. Inheritance mattered. The machine that demanded perfection struggled to reproduce itself. By the classical period, Sparta's citizen population may have been shockingly small relative to its fame. A giant legend standing on a narrowing base. And that, sleepy friends, is where we pause our sandals at the threshold. We have met the Spartan boy handed to the state, the adult bound to comrades, the society fed by helots, and the warrior image polished brighter than reality. In the next part, we will march into the battles that made Sparta immortal, including Thermopylae, where legend and fact continue politely wrestling in the dust. For now, rest easy, and be grateful no one is grading your endurance at breakfast. Welcome back. Settle in again, adjust the blanket, and let your mind drift toward narrow mountain roads, bronze helmets, and one of the most famous last stands in human memory. Tonight we continue with Sparta at the moment it became eternal in legend. Because if Sparta had no Thermopylae, it would still be historically important, respected, feared, and endlessly discussed by people who enjoy strict routines. But with Thermopylae, Sparta became myth. And myths, as always, are tidier than real life. We begin in the early 5th century BCE, when the Persian Empire was the superpower of the age. Vast, wealthy, administratively sophisticated, and stretching across enormous territory. While Greek city-states bickered in their usual style, Persia governed lands from Anatolia through Mesopotamia and beyond. So when Persia looked west toward Greece, it was not some scrappy underdog. It was the heavyweight entering a neighborhood argument. The first major Persian invasion under Darius I ended badly for Persia at the Battle of Marathon in 490 BC, where the Athenians and allies defeated a landing force. This was embarrassing. Empires do not enjoy being told no by smaller states with strong opinions. Darius died before a second invasion could happen, and his son Xerxes I took up the project. He assembled a massive expedition to subdue Greece. Ancient sources, especially Herodotus, describe enormous numbers. Modern historians debate the scale heavily. Ancient writers loved large dramatic figures the way modern internet headlines love the phrase, "You won't believe." Still, regardless of exact numbers, Xerxes brought a formidable force by land and sea. The Greek city-states, usually too busy competing with each other, formed a defensive alliance. Not everyone joined. Some Medized, meaning they sided with Persia or submitted. Others hesitated. Unity was selective, nervous, and very Greek. Sparta, as the leading military land power, took a major role in defense planning. Now enters Leonidas, king of Sparta. He was one of Sparta's dual kings from the Aegean dynasty. Not born first in line, he rose after the deaths of elder brothers, which is one of history's recurring hiring processes. Everyone else is unavailable. Leonidas was likely experienced, respected, and already older than the square-jawed young warrior many modern depictions prefer. Real leaders often look more like seasoned administrators than action figures. The Greeks chose to block the Persian advance at Thermopylae, a narrow coastal pass in central Greece. The location was strategically useful because it reduced the advantage of larger numbers. A cramped battlefield is a wonderful equalizer. It is the military version of making everyone use one checkout lane. Leonidas marched with a small advance force, including his famous 300 Spartan citizens. Important note, this was not the entire Greek force. Thousands of other Greeks from various cities were present: Thespians, Thebans, Corinthians, Phocians, and others over time. But 300 Spartans and several thousand coalition partners lacks marketing efficiency. Sparta did not send its full army immediately, partly because of religious festivals and the Olympic truce. This often sounds absurd to modern ears. Why not deploy everyone? Because ancient societies frequently mixed war, ritual, calendar obligations, and politics in ways that now seem baffling. Also, states delay obvious action all the time. Human governance remains consistent. Leonidas' force reached Thermopylae and prepared defenses. The Spartans and their allies used the terrain brilliantly. Persian assault struggled in the narrow pass, where disciplined hoplites with heavy armor, long spears, and shielded formation could hold against attacks. This is where Spartan training mattered. The phalanx was not glamorous. It was pressure, coordination, steadiness, and mutual trust. Hold your place. Keep the line. Move together. Try not to panic while someone yells in 3 languages. For 2 days, the Greeks resisted repeated Persian attacks. Elite Persian troops, later called the Immortals, were reportedly committed and also failed to break through decisively in the constricted terrain. Cue several disappointed imperial memos. Now, if Thermopylae had ended there, it would be remembered as a sharp defensive success. But history prefers a tragic curve. A local man named Ephialtes revealed a mountain path that allowed Persian forces to outflank the Greek position. There was indeed a route around the pass, and once the Persians used it, the defenders risked encirclement. Every famous defensive position eventually meets a local guide with questionable priorities. Leonidas learned of the maneuver and dismissed much of the Greek force. Why exactly remains debated. To preserve troops? Because many had already withdrawn? Because continued resistance served strategic delay and symbolic purpose? Likely some combination. What followed became legend. Leonidas remained with his Spartans, along with Thespian volunteers who stayed and fought, and a Theban contingent whose role remains controversial in sources. The final stand was not Sparta alone, though later memory often tried very hard to make it so. The defenders fought knowing the end was near. Leonidas was killed. The remaining troops continued resistance until overwhelmed. Herodotus records epitaphs and stories emphasizing duty and obedience, including the famous sentiment, "Stranger, tell the Spartans that we lie here obedient to their laws." Very Spartan, very concise, not a wasted syllable in sight. Now, let's gently untangle myth from reality. First, Thermopylae was a defeat. A noble, delaying, morale-building, strategically useful defeat, perhaps, but still a defeat. Persia advanced into Greece afterward. Second, Spartan bravery was real, but not unique. Thespians who stayed voluntarily also displayed extraordinary courage and received far less attention because they lacked a long-term branding department. Third, the event mattered symbolically because it showed Persia could be resisted. A smaller Greek force had stood firm against imperial power and bought time for further defense. And symbols can move armies. Soon after, the Greeks won a crucial naval victory at Salamis under Athenian leadership. Then came Plataea in 479 BCE, where a Greek coalition defeated Persian land forces decisively. Sparta played a major role there under Pausanias. So, if Thermopylae lit the torch, other battles carried it. But Leonidas got the statues, such as memory. The Spartan reputation soared. Their discipline at Thermopylae seemed to confirm everything admirers believed: courage, obedience, sacrifice, contempt for comfort, and hair somehow remaining cinematic under stress. Yet even here, we should notice something subtler. Sparta's warrior system was designed not for dramatic last stands, but for collective battlefield reliability. Thermopylae became famous because it was unusual. Most Spartan warfare aimed to win efficiently, maintain order, and survive. No state spends decades training elite citizens merely to create inspirational endings. Still, Leonidas' death became central to Spartan identity. Fallen in service, faithful to law, king among citizens. A perfect civic myth. And every society loves a useful dead hero. After the Persian Wars, Sparta stood at the peak of prestige. Athens gained power too, especially through naval leadership and the Delian League. For a while, both cities basked in victory while quietly preparing to dislike each other, which they were exceptionally good at. Sparta remained conservative and land-focused. Athens became wealthier, more imperial, more artistic, louder, and increasingly convinced it was the main character of Greece. Sparta found this irritating. Athens found Sparta dull. The rest of Greece got caught in the middle. But before we drift toward that rivalry, let's linger one more moment with the real Spartan warrior in battle. He was heavily armed. Bronze helmet, cuirass, or later lighter equipment, shield called the aspes, spear, secondary sword. He marched in line with comrades. He depended on cohesion more than rage. He trained to suppress fear, not because Spartans lacked fear, but because everyone feels fear. The difference was social conditioning. A Spartan who ran risked disgrace. A Spartan who held firm kept honor. Shame and belonging were powerful tools, sometimes stronger than patriotism, often stronger than affection. The warrior ideal was expensive psychologically. Imagine being taught since childhood that hesitation dishonors family, friends, and state. That death can be preferable to failure. That emotional vulnerability, has little place in public life. You may become formidable. You may also become profoundly trapped. Sparta's greatness rested on narrowing what a man was allowed to be. That tension sits beneath every polished helmet. Leonidas himself likely understood duty in exactly those terms. Not as movie freedom speech heroics, but as obedience to role, law, and expectation. He was king, commander, symbol. When the moment came, there was almost no other script available. He played his part to the end, and later ages applauded. Centuries afterward, Romans admired Sparta. Renaissance thinkers revisited it. Modern nationalists cherry-picked it. Fitness influencers discovered it between protein powders. Filmmakers turned it into operatic fantasy. Meanwhile, the actual Thermopylae story remains more human and more interesting. Coalition politics, terrain strategy, sacrifice, propaganda, and memory. Also sandals. Always sandals. So, as we close this part, picture the narrow pass at dawn. Dust in the air. Bronze catching pale light. Men tired. Alert, aware of what comes next. Some Spartans, some Thespians, some others history names less often. Waiting together. No thunderous soundtrack. Just breathing. In the next part, we'll float into the long feud between Sparta and Athens, where the most feared warriors in Greece discovered that beating poets, sailors, accountants, and democracy enthusiasts could be unexpectedly complicated. Sleep well until then. Welcome back once more. Get comfortable, settle into the pillow, and let us drift into one of the most famous rivalries in history. Sparta and Athens. Two cities, two egos, two completely different lifestyles, and one long, grinding conflict that exhausted nearly everyone involved. If Thermopylae made Sparta legendary, the Peloponnesian War revealed what Spartan power actually looked like over time. Patient, stubborn, cautious, effective in some ways, and occasionally baffled by anything involving ships, money, or creative thinking. Because being excellent at land warfare does not automatically prepare you for geopolitics. Many have learned this the hard way. After the Persian Wars, Athens rose rapidly. It led the Delian League, originally an alliance against Persia. Member states contributed ships or money. Over time, Athens treated those contributions less like alliance dues and more like rent. Then it moved the League treasury to Athens, which is one of history's clearest uses of the phrase for safekeeping. Athens used wealth to build fleets, monuments, and imperial influence. The city became dazzling, ambitious, artistic, democratic for male citizens, and increasingly convinced it had excellent taste in everything. Sparta watched this with deep suspicion. Sparta led the Peloponnesian League, a network of allies centered on land power. It preferred stability, hierarchy, and fewer speeches per hour. To Spartans, Athens looked flashy, restless, manipulative, and alarmingly fond of innovation. To Athenians, Sparta looked severe, slow, humorless, and culturally underfurnished. Both sides were partly correct. Tensions rose for decades through proxy disputes, alliance conflicts, and the standard Greek pastime of taking offense. Finally, in 431 BC, war began. This would become the Peloponnesian War, though calling it a war is almost generous. It was more like a series of wars, truces, disasters, betrayals, and policy errors stretched over nearly 3 decades. A marathon of bad decisions. Sparta's king Archidamus, too, initially pursued cautious strategy. Rather than hurling men into reckless battle, Sparta invaded Attica, the countryside around Athens, hoping to pressure the Athenians into open combat. Athens declined, because Athens had walls. The long walls connected the city to its port at Piraeus, allowing supplies by sea. Pericles, the leading Athenian statesman, urged citizens to stay behind defenses and rely on naval strength. This was sensible militarily. Emotionally, it was less popular. Imagine being a proud landowning citizen watching Spartans burn your farms while being told to remain indoors and trust strategy. Human beings rarely enjoy strategic patience when their olive trees are on fire. Still, Athens avoided decisive land battle. Sparta could ravage fields, but it could not easily force surrender. Each year, Spartan armies marched in, damaged crops, and left. A very expensive seasonal tradition. Then plague struck Athens in 430 BC. Crowded behind walls, the city suffered a devastating epidemic. The exact disease remains debated: typhus, typhoid, smallpox, something else. What matters is that many died, morale collapsed, and Pericles himself eventually perished. Sometimes history changes not through genius or battle, but microbes entering crowded streets. Sparta had not planned for that. Athens had not either. The war continued. Now here is where Sparta's image of constant battlefield dominance needs soft lighting. Early in the war, Sparta was formidable on land but strategically limited. It lacked the naval supremacy to crush Athens directly. It relied on allies. It moved cautiously. It often hesitated. This was not weakness. It was structural reality. Sparta's citizen manpower was precious and relatively small. Losses mattered enormously. Unlike larger states, Sparta could not casually replace elite citizens. Every dead Spartiate was expensive in a way myth rarely mentions. So Spartan commanders often behaved less like berserk conquerors and more like risk managers, which, admittedly, is harder to put on a t-shirt. Meanwhile, Athens launched raids, naval operations, and imperial enforcement across the Aegean. Both sides committed brutal acts against smaller communities. Idealized Greek liberty frequently took the afternoon off. One famous episode came at Plataea, where a city allied with Athens was besieged by Spartan and allied forces. After long resistance, survivors were tried and executed in chillingly procedural fashion. Greek warfare could be savage, but often in bureaucratic tones. Elsewhere, civil conflicts erupted inside city-states as factions aligned with either Athens or Sparta. Democracies and oligarchies clashed. Citizens denounced neighbors. Old grudges suddenly wore ideological costumes. War is efficient at uncovering resentments already waiting in the basement. Thucydides, the great historian of the conflict, recorded this with grim clarity. He noted how language itself changed under pressure. Recklessness became courage, Caution became cowardice. Moderation became weakness. A pattern so ancient and so modern it barely needs translation. Now, let us float to a moment that embarrassed Sparta badly, the Battle of Pylos and Sphacteria in 425 BC. Athenians fortified a position at Pylos in Spartan territory. Through a chain of events, Spartan soldiers became stranded on nearby Sphacteria Island. Athenian forces trapped them. Spartans, famous for never surrendering in popular imagination, suddenly faced capture. And some did surrender. The shock across Greece was immense. Spartan invincibility had always depended partly on reputation. Seeing Spartans taken prisoner suggested they were, inconveniently, mortal. News spread like spilled oil. Athens used the prisoners as leverage, discouraging Spartan invasions of Attica for a time. This was a major strategic and symbolic setback. So much for come back with your shield or on it. Sometimes you come back in negotiations. Sparta adapted, as practical states do. One of its most effective commanders emerged around this period, Brasidas. Brasidas was energetic, flexible, and unusually dynamic by Spartan standards. He campaigned in northern Greece, encouraged revolts against Athenian control, and won admiration even from enemies. Every rigid system occasionally produces one person who seems suspiciously alive. Brasidas captured Amphipolis, an important Athenian possession. Both he and the Athenian leader Cleon died in battle there in 422 BC. With hawks removed, peace became possible. The Peace of Nicias followed in 421 BC. It was meant to restore stability. It did not. Many allies disliked it. Terms were contested. Fighting continued indirectly. Trust was scarce. The document existed, which is not the same as functioning. Then Athens committed one of history's grand strategic blunders, the Sicilian expedition. In 415 BC, Athens launched a huge expedition to Sicily, aiming to conquer Syracuse and expand power westward. It sent massive resources, talented commanders, and confidence levels visible from orbit. The campaign became a catastrophe. Delays, indecision, internal rivalry, Spartan intervention, and Syracusan resistance destroyed the expedition. Ships lost, armies trapped, thousands killed or captured. If imperial overreach had a stage production, this was opening night. Sparta benefited enormously. It occupied Decilia and Attica permanently, harming Athenian economy. It also, crucially, began developing stronger naval capacity, with Persian financial support. And here we meet one of history's favorite twists, the anti-Persian heroes of old now working with Persian money against fellow Greeks. Principles often become negotiable after enough budget meetings. Sparta's later war effort owed much to commanders like Lysander, an ambitious and politically skilled Spartan who understood fleets, alliances, and patronage better than many traditionalists. He cultivated Persian Prince Cyrus the Younger and used funding to build and sustain Spartan naval power. Because eventually even Sparta had to admit ships existed. This matters deeply. The final defeat of Athens would not come from hoplites marching nobly through fields. It would come through maritime strategy, finances, and adapted institutions. The warrior state had to modernize just enough to win. Athens, meanwhile, endured oligarchic coups, political turmoil, and resource strain. Yet it remained resilient almost absurdly long. Democracies can be chaotic, but they can also absorb punishment through sheer argumentative persistence. Finally, in 405 BC, Lysander won a decisive naval victory at Agoge, capturing much of the Athenian fleet. Without fleet access, Athens was doomed. The city surrendered in 404 BC. Its walls were torn down. Empire lost. Sparta stood victorious. Cue Spartan satisfaction, delivered in minimal words. Yet victory carried irony. Sparta had beaten Athens by becoming less purely Spartan than the legend allowed. It used foreign money, naval innovation, diplomacy, and prolonged coalition management. Not just spear lines and stern glances. And once victorious, Sparta inherited the messy business of dominance. It was not especially suited for that. Spartan harmasts and oligarchic regimes were imposed in places. Resentment spread. Former allies grew uneasy. Sparta discovered that running Greece required more than defeating rivals. Administration is the revenge of logistics. Meanwhile, inside Sparta, wealth inequalities increased, citizen numbers continued shrinking, and the old austere ideal became harder to sustain. The city that preached simplicity now handled tribute, politics, and imperial temptations. Many societies lose themselves not in defeat, but in success. So, as we close this part, picture Sparta at the height of triumph in 404 BC. Athens humbled, rivals wary, prestige immense, and yet cracks already visible beneath the polished shield. In the next part, we will wander into Sparta's decline, where the feared warrior state meets demographic problems, changing warfare, and one especially unpleasant surprise from Thebes. Yes, Thebes. The city most people forget until it wins. Sleep peacefully until then. Welcome back. Settle in, loosen the jaw, and let us continue with a gentle stroll through decline. Sparta had defeated Athens. It had prestige, influence, and the smug satisfaction of winning the longest argument in Greece. This should have been the glorious high point. Instead, it was the beginning of a long, awkward unraveling, because victory solves fewer problems than advertised. The Spartan system had always depended on balance. A citizen elite small enough to be cohesive, but large enough to field armies. Helots obedient enough to sustain agriculture, but numerous enough to remain useful. Allies respectful enough to cooperate, but not so resentful that they rebelled. Wealth modest enough to preserve equality, but sufficient enough to maintain status. That is a lot of tightropes for one city, and Sparta was wobbling on all of them. After the Peloponnesian War, Sparta became the dominant Greek power. It stationed governors, interfered in other cities, and backed oligarchic factions. This was not wildly popular. Cities that had welcomed Spartan liberation soon discovered liberation came with instructions, supervision, and occasionally armed reminders. Classic experience. Sparta also continued dealing with Persia. The same Persia once cast as the great invader now became an unavoidable diplomatic partner in Greek politics. Alliances shifted constantly. Gold moved quietly. Principles moved faster. Greek interstate relations were less noble epic and more rotating inconvenience. Now, one of Sparta's deepest structural problems was population decline among full citizens. To be a Spartiate, a man needed legitimate descent, successful participation in the agoge, and the means to contribute to the communal messes. Land mattered. Inheritance mattered. Economic misfortune could strip status. If a citizen could not maintain required contributions, he might lose full standing. So citizenship was not simply birthright forever. Over generations, estates concentrated into fewer hands. Some families became wealthier. Others fell out of the citizen class. Numbers shrank. The warrior state was slowly running out of warriors. Ancient observers noticed this. Aristotle later criticized Spartan property concentration, especially noting the large role of inheritance and wealth accumulation. When philosophers begin discussing your demographic crisis, the vibes are not strong. At the same time, Helladependence remained dangerous. Helots had long memories and understandable grievances. Spartan fear of revolt never vanished. This meant armies campaigning abroad often worried about security at home. Imagine trying to dominate Greece while also glancing nervously back at your own fields. Then came military change. Sparta's traditional strength lay in disciplined, hoplite warfare and prestige leadership. But Greek warfare was evolving. Light troops, cavalry, siegecraft, naval operations, and more flexible tactics mattered increasingly. Rigid excellence in one mode becomes less useful when the whole game changes. Sparta still produced capable leaders. One of the most famous was King Agesilaus II, who ruled for decades beginning in the late 5th century BCE. Agesilaus was energetic, intelligent, ambitious, and physically disabled by a lame leg, which did not prevent him from campaigning extensively. He fought in Asia Minor against Persia and pursued Spartan interests aggressively. He was admired by some, criticized by others, and involved in enough wars to make accountants weep. But even strong kings could not reverse structural strain. Sparta's growing dominance provoked coalitions against it. Former allies disliked Spartan arrogance. Rivals feared its power. Persia, never sentimental, funded whichever Greeks best served Persian interests at a given moment. In 395 BC, the Corinthian War began. Athens, Thebes, Corinth, and Argos opposed Sparta, with Persian support shifting against the Spartans. Yes, Athens was back. History enjoys recurring characters. The war dragged on. Sparta won some land battles, notably at Chaeronea under Agesilaus, but faced pressure elsewhere. At sea, Spartan naval fortunes suffered. Eventually, Persia imposed the king's peace in 387 BC. This treaty recognized Persian control over Greek cities in Asia Minor while claiming autonomy for Greek cities elsewhere. So the city-state famed for defending Greece from Persia now helped accept Persian terms over Greek affairs. One imagines Leonidas staring silently from the afterlife. Still, Sparta used the peace to police Greece in its own favor. It broke up federations, intervened politically, and maintained hegemony through force. But hegemony without broad legitimacy is basically expensive babysitting. Now, let us drift toward Thebes. Poor Thebes. Often overshadowed in popular memory by Athens' philosophers and Sparta's abs. Yet in the 4th century BCE, Thebes would become the city that broke Sparta. Sparta had interfered in Theban politics repeatedly. In 382 BCE, a Spartan commander seized the Theban citadel, the Cadmea, through dubious means during peacetime. Diplomatically, this was what experts call not ideal. Thebes eventually expelled the Spartan-backed regime in 379 BCE and began rebuilding power. Key leaders emerged, especially Epaminondas and Pelopidas. These were serious men with serious talent. Epaminondas, in particular, was one of the finest generals of antiquity. Calm, innovative, intelligent, and inconveniently brilliant for Sparta. Thebes reorganized militarily, strengthened the Boeotian League, and prepared for confrontation. Sparta, meanwhile, still relied heavily on reputation. Reputation is useful, right, until someone stops believing it. That moment came in 371 BCE at the Battle of Leuctra. Take a slow breath, because this battle changed Greek history. A Spartan-led force met the Thebans in Boeotia. Spartan armies had long been feared as nearly unbeatable in hoplite battle. Not literally invincible, but culturally close enough. Epaminondas had other plans. Instead of deploying evenly, he massed his left wing in unusual depth, some ancient accounts suggest 50 ranks deep, and aimed it directly at Sparta's elite right wing, where the king stood. He used an oblique formation, refusing parts of his line while concentrating force decisively at one point. In simple terms, he punched hard where it mattered most. Military orthodoxy hates this one trick. The result was devastating. The Spartan line broke. King Cleombrotus I was killed. Hundreds of Spartan citizens died, including many from the elite corps Sparta could least afford to lose. Leuctra was not merely a defeat. It was psychological demolition. The warrior machine had been beaten head-on. No mountain pass. No trick ambush. No plague. No starvation. Straight battle. And lost. News rippled across Greece. If Sparta could be broken in open combat, then the old hierarchy was over. Thebes followed up aggressively. Epaminondas invaded the Peloponnese itself, something nearly unimaginable earlier. He entered Laconia, threatening Spartan homeland territory. For generations, Spartan citizens had lived with the prestige of seeming untouchable at home. Now, enemy armies marched through the neighborhood. Even more damaging, Thebes helped free Messenia and establish an independent Messenian state in 369 BCE. This was catastrophic for Sparta. Remember those helots sustaining Spartan society? Much of that labor base came from Messenia. Losing control there meant losing manpower, agricultural wealth, and the economic foundation of the old system. It was as if someone removed the floor while complementing the architecture. Sparta survived as a city, but never recovered former supremacy. Citizen numbers continued falling. territory, and influence shrank. Thebes briefly became leading Greek power, though it too could not sustain dominance for long. Then another rising force appeared to the north, Macedon. Whenever Greek city-states exhausted themselves, Macedon seemed to quietly stretch in the hallway. Philip II of Macedon learned from Greek warfare, reformed his army, used diplomacy, marriage, bribery, and force with unnerving effectiveness. By the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BC, Macedon defeated a coalition led by Athens and Thebes. Sparta notably did not join that coalition. Whether from caution, weakness, pride, or all three, Sparta stood aside. Soon Greece's center of gravity had shifted permanently. When Philip later demanded submission, Sparta allegedly replied with laconic brevity. Ancient anecdotes give versions like if. Very stylish. Less strategically persuasive. Philip did not immediately conquer Sparta outright, but Macedonian power eclipsed it. Under Alexander the Great, the world expanded far beyond old city-state rivalries. Sparta became provincial legend while empires marched east. There is something quietly tragic in this. A society that sacrificed comfort, art, wealth, and softness for military supremacy achieved it briefly, then lost it through the very rigidity that made it famous. Too few citizens. Too narrow a model. Too much dependence on coercion. Too little adaptability until late. Sparta had trained boys into warriors, but not enough into citizens for a changing age. And yet, even in decline, admiration lingered. Many Greeks still respected Spartan discipline. Outsiders still found the old customs fascinating. The name retained gravity long after the power faded, because symbols often outlive systems. So as we close this part, picture an older Sparta after Leuctra. Quieter streets, fewer citizens, memories heavier than shields. Veterans telling stories of a world where their city led Greece. And younger listeners noticing the world had already moved on. In the next part, we will drift into daily Spartan life beyond battle. The women, food, marriage customs, black broth, awkward romance, and what it actually felt like to live inside history's sternest group project. Sleep well until then. Thebes eventually expelled the Spartan-backed regime in 379 BCE and began rebuilding power. Key leaders emerged, especially Epaminondas and Pelopidas. These were serious men with serious talent. Epaminondas, in particular, was one of the finest generals of antiquity. Calm, innovative, intelligent, and inconveniently brilliant for Sparta. Thebes reorganized militarily, strengthened the Boeotian League, and prepared for confrontation. Sparta, meanwhile, still relied heavily on reputation. Reputation is useful, right, until someone stops believing it. That moment came in 371 BCE at the Battle of Leuctra. Take a slow breath, because this battle changed Greek history. A Spartan-led force met the Thebans in Boeotia. Spartan armies had long been feared as nearly unbeatable in hoplite battle. Not literally invincible, but culturally close enough. Epaminondas had other plans. Instead of deploying evenly, he massed his left wing in unusual depth, Some ancient accounts suggest 50 ranks deep, and aimed it directly at Sparta's elite right wing, where the king stood. He used an oblique formation, refusing parts of his line while concentrating force decisively at one point. In simple terms, he punched hard where it mattered most. Military orthodoxy hates this one trick. The result was devastating. The Spartan line broke. King Cleombrotus I was killed. Hundreds of Spartan citizens died, including many from the elite corps Sparta could least afford to lose. Leuctra was not merely a defeat. It was psychological demolition. The warrior machine had been beaten head-on. No mountain pass, no trick ambush, no plague, no starvation. Straight battle, and lost. News rippled across Greece. If Sparta could be broken in open combat, then the old hierarchy was over. Thebes followed up aggressively. Epaminondas invaded the Peloponnese itself, something nearly unimaginable earlier. He entered Laconia, threatening Spartan homeland territory. For generations, Spartan citizens had lived with the prestige of seeming untouchable at home. Now, enemy armies marched through the neighborhood. Even more damaging, Thebes helped free Messenia and establish an independent Messenian state in 369 BCE. This was catastrophic for Sparta. Remember those helots sustaining Spartan society? Much of that labor base came from Messenia. Losing control there meant losing manpower, agricultural wealth, and the economic foundation of the old system. It was as if someone removed the floor while complementing the architecture. Sparta survived as a city, but never recovered former supremacy. Citizen numbers continued falling. Territory and influence shrank. Thebes briefly became leading Greek power, though it too could not sustain dominance for long. Then another rising force appeared to the north. Macedon. Whenever Greek city-states exhausted themselves, Macedon seemed to quietly stretch in the hallway. Philip II of Macedon learned from Greek warfare, reformed his army, used diplomacy, marriage, bribery, and force with unnerving effectiveness. By the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BC, Macedon defeated a coalition led by Athens and Thebes. Sparta notably did not join that coalition. Whether from caution, weakness, pride, or all three, Sparta stood aside. Soon Greece's center of gravity had shifted permanently. When Philip later demanded submission, Sparta allegedly replied with laconic brevity. Ancient anecdotes give versions like if. Very stylish. Less strategically persuasive. Philip did not immediately conquer Sparta outright, but Macedonian power eclipsed it. Under Alexander the Great, the world expanded far beyond old city-state rivalries. Sparta became provincial legend while empires marched east. There is something quietly tragic in this. A society that sacrificed comfort, art, wealth, and softness for military supremacy achieved it briefly, then lost it through the very rigidity that made it famous. Too few citizens. Too narrow a model. Too much dependence on coercion. Too little adaptability until late. Sparta had trained boys into warriors, but not enough into citizens for a changing age. And yet, even in decline, admiration lingered. Many Greeks still respected Spartan discipline. Outsiders still found the old customs fascinating. The name retained gravity long after the power faded, because symbols often outlive systems. So as we close this part, picture an older Sparta after Leuctra. Quieter streets, fewer citizens, memories heavier than shields. Veterans telling stories of a world where their city led Greece. And younger listeners noticing the world had already moved on. In the next part, we will drift into daily Spartan life beyond battle. The women, food, marriage customs, black broth, awkward romance, and what it actually felt like to live inside history's sternest group project. Sleep well until then. Welcome back. Get comfortable again, and let us leave the battlefield for something far more intimate. Daily life. Because history often gives us helmets and banners, while the real story is usually breakfast, household tension, strange rules, and people trying to get through the week. Sparta, despite its reputation, was not made entirely of marching men posing against sunsets. It was a functioning society, which means it contained meals, marriages, chores, gossip, property disputes, awkward family dynamics, and citizens pretending everything was normal. Tonight we wander through the streets. First, the city itself. Sparta was unusual among Greek cities because it lacked the monumental urban style people often imagine. It was not densely walled like some rivals for much of its classical history. It was spread across several villages in the Eurotas Valley rather than centered around one dramatic acropolis packed with marble spectacle. Ancient visitors sometimes found it surprisingly plain. No grand theatrical self-display. No endless rows of statues announcing refined taste. Fewer elegant flourishes. Very on-brand. Spartans liked the idea that their men, not their walls, defended the city. This sounds noble, though walls are also useful. Ask almost anyone. Homes were practical. Material simplicity was admired, at least publicly. Luxury could attract criticism. Whether wealthy Spartans privately enjoyed comfort while praising austerity is a question with timeless relevance. Many people adore simplicity once servants arrange it. Now, let us discuss food. Sparta became famous, or infamous, for plain eating. The most legendary dish was black broth. Ancient writers describe it as a mixture involving pork, blood, vinegar, and salt. Exact recipes are debated. Reviews, however, were consistently rough. One story tells of a visitor tasting it and finally understanding why Spartans did not fear death. Harsh but memorable. Black broth likely served as a communal staple more symbolic than gourmet. Spartan values praised moderation and toughness. Lavish dining was suspect. Eating for pleasure alone risked looking soft. Imagine trying to host a dinner party in that culture. Yes, tonight we're serving seasoned despair with hints of iron. Still, Spartans did eat other foods: bread, cheese, figs, olives, meat when available, wine in moderation, and produce from their fertile lands. They were not surviving exclusively on liquid punishment. The famous communal meals, the syssitia, were central to male citizen life. Adult Spartan men belonged to dining groups that ate together regularly. These were political, social, and ideological institutions as much as meals. Attendance mattered. Conversation happened there. Status was reinforced there. And one assumes at least one older man always complained that younger generations lacked discipline. Some traditions never die. Members contributed provisions, usually from estates worked by helots. If a man could not maintain contributions, he risked losing standing. So even dinner carried civic pressure. Miss enough payments and suddenly you are socially downgraded over soup. Now marriage. Spartan marriage customs fascinated later writers because they were different from many Greek norms. Women married relatively later than in some other Greek societies, often in later teens rather than very early adolescence. Men might marry around 20 or later, though still spending much time in barracks life until 30. This created unusual domestic arrangements. Some accounts describe husbands visiting wives secretly at night, especially early in marriage, because men continued communal obligations. Nothing says romance like scheduling affection around military curfew. These stories may be stylized or exaggerated, but they reflect a real truth. The state often came before the household. Marriage primarily served reproduction, inheritance, and social continuity. Love was possible, certainly, but not the administrative centerpiece. Spartan authorities wanted healthy children and stable citizen lines. Emotional spontaneity was not a policy priority. Now, to Spartan women, one of the most discussed features of the society. Compared with women in many other Greek cities, especially Athens, Spartan women had greater visibility, physical mobility, and economic influence. They could own and inherit property. They managed estates while men trained or campaigned. They appeared in public more openly and were known for direct speech. This shocked some outsiders. Athenian writers often portrayed Spartan women as bold, outspoken, even scandalously independent, which sometimes simply means they were accustomed to hearing women speak. Spartan girls received physical training, running, wrestling, exercise of various forms. Ancient explanations tie this to producing healthy children, but it likely also reflected broader civic culture around strength and discipline. Again, pragmatism dressed as ideology. By later periods, women controlled a significant share of Spartan land through inheritance and dowries. This gave them real economic leverage. Aristotle complained about it in terms that strongly suggest discomfort with female influence. When philosophers complain women own too much property, women probably own enough property to matter. Spartan mothers became iconic in moral anecdotes. They were said to prize courage, shame cowardice, and speak in concise, formidable lines. Some sayings may be literary inventions. Ancient writers loved using Spartan mothers as symbols. Real mothers, of course, likely contained multitudes. Some were proud. Some were frightened. Some were grieving. Some probably wished their sons had chosen accounting. Now, let us talk childhood more broadly. Spartan girls remained with families, trained physically, and prepared for adult household roles with more public presence than elsewhere. Spartan boys entered the agoge at 7, as we discussed. This meant households were emotionally divided in a peculiar way. Sons were biologically family, socially state property and training. Imagine parenting under those terms. You nurture a child for years, then hand him to a communal system designed to harden him and reduce dependence on you. Family affection did not vanish, but it was institutionally constrained. Tenderness had to survive in narrow spaces. Older men also played mentorship roles for youths. Ancient sources describe socially significant bonds between older and younger males, though practices and meanings are debated. Greek societies often framed such relationships differently than modern categories allow. In Sparta, these ties could reinforce education, loyalty, and status networks. Human societies rarely fit tidy boxes. Now, let us drift to speech and manners. Spartans cultivated brevity. Laconic speech meant saying much with little. Famous retorts fill ancient literature. When Philip II of Macedon threatened destruction if he entered Laconia, Spartans supposedly replied, "If." Whether authentic or polished later, the anecdote captures the style. Short answer. Maximum attitude. This preference likely reflected values of self-control and disdain for rhetorical excess. Athens loved speeches. Sparta preferred suspicious silence. To be fair, speeches often deserve suspicion. Music and dance also mattered more than stereotypes suggest. Spartan youths trained in choruses, festivals, and ritual performances. Collective movement built discipline and identity. Poetry by Tertius inspired martial values. Rhythm helped armies march and communities bond. Even stern societies sing. Religion was woven through life. Spartans honored gods through festivals, sacrifices, and rites like other Greeks. They were especially attentive to omens and ritual timing. This could delay campaigns or shape decisions. Modern people sometimes mock this, but we too delay important actions for abstract systems. Ours simply involve calendars, inboxes, and terms of service. Now, hygiene and appearance. Contrary to the mud-covered brute stereotype, Spartans cared about grooming. Adult men wore long hair in some periods and groomed before battle. Physical bearing mattered. Strength and discipline were aesthetic as well as practical ideals. They were stern, not feral. And yes, some undoubtedly admired themselves in polished bronze when no one was looking. Crime and discipline existed naturally. Theft among boys could be tolerated as cunning if done skillfully, but failure invited punishment. Public shame was powerful. Formal law and communal pressure worked together. This is effective, though exhausting. Imagine every neighbor as a compliance officer. Now, let us mention humor. People often assume Spartans lacked humor entirely, but dry wit seems very likely. Many laconic sayings are essentially deadpan jokes sharpened into social weapons. A culture that values short speech often values devastating short speech. You just would not get a 10-minute anecdote first. As Sparta aged and declined, the contrast between ideal and reality widened. Wealth disparities increased. Some elites lived more comfortably. Citizen numbers shrank. Old austerity remained celebrated even as circumstances changed. Again, timeless. Many societies worship values most loudly when drifting away from them. So, what did daily Spartan life feel like? For a male citizen, constant expectation, communal oversight, military obligation, limited privacy, honor culture, political identity, dependence on labor beneath him. For a woman of status, unusual authority in some areas, estate management, strong expectations around reproduction and lineage, public visibility mixed with social pressure. For a helot, exploitation, insecurity, surveillance, compulsory labor, and the burden of supporting everyone else's legend. For outsiders visiting, curiosity, admiration, discomfort, and probably terrible soup. Sparta fascinates because it pursued collective discipline more intensely than most societies dare. But discipline always lands unevenly. Someone benefits more. Someone pays more. Usually several someones. As we close this part, imagine evening in Sparta. Men returning from training or mess halls. Women managing households and lands. Children under watchful systems. Smoke from cooking fires. Talk kept concise. Pride mixed with strain. A city performing toughness even at home. In the next part, we'll drift into the afterlife of Sparta, how Romans, philosophers, nationalists, movie directors, and modern internet warriors reinvented the Spartans into whatever they personally needed. Because no one conquers history quite like later fans. Sleep peacefully until then.